Welcome to Desperately Seeking the 80s. I am Meg.
And I'm Jessica. And Meg and I have been friends since 1982. We got through middle school and high school together here in New York City, where we still live.
And where we podcast about New York City in the 80s. I do Ripped from the Headlines.
And I do pop culture.
So this is the second time this week I have seen you, Jessica.
Huzzah.
I know. And we get to
Yay.
have dinner after this.
My God.
Oh my
What a
God.
week this has been.
No joke. But you know what? It makes sense because it's the first week after Labor Day. That's always going to be crazy.
Re-entering the atmosphere is a little jarring.
It sure is. And thank you, New York, for being really fall-like.
Well, it's getting...
Because it helps.
Yes. It's not that vile, sultry... I always describe it as like when you walk outside in the depth of August into the heat and the humidity, it's like walking into a hot, wet washcloth. It's disgusting.
I am ready for a breeze. I'm ready for a sweater.
I'm ready for a blazer.
Ooh,
all I want to do
nice.
is wear a blazer and a light scarf.
I just went through my sweater collection and got rid of like half of my things. I'm like, these do not bring me joy.
Amazing.
You're out of here.
Did you donate them?
Yes.
Interesting. So a friend of ours, who I will not mention by name on this, is very, very into bringing her stuff to Buffalo Exchange.
Huh.
And you can get credit or you can get cash.
No way.
I
thought Buffalo Exchange
it's not
was
a consignment.
Way downtown.
There are a couple of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Yes.
Sounds like it would require some schlepping, which is not my favorite thing to do, but I guess it's worth it.
Look, I mean, and I've seen her get really cute things. I always thought that it was like, for people who are teens and in their 20s.
Yeah.
But I don't think so. And there's some, like, if you'll excuse the expression, designer goods there. So
Blue Tree, my favorite store in the city, which is on Madison between 92nd and 91st, just got the cutest sweaters. And of course, they are insanely
They're like $9 billion.
What the hey?
Well,
They're so cute, Jessica. I want it.
I know. What's the sweater that you have your eye on?
Hot pink, fuzzy.
Like Angora?
Yeah, exactly. And it's cropped. Oh my God, it's so cute. But yeah, I cannot buy that sweater. I cannot buy that sweater.
It's important to know what your cutoff is.
Yeah. The clothing at Blue Tree is
very
beyond
easy.
My cutoff.
Yeah.
For real.
Yes. And it's I've had moments where I'm like, this will be the one thing I buy. Who am I kidding?
I know.
Like, get out of here.
Should we get started?
Yes.
Okay. I'm excited about I'm excited about this story. I hope you enjoy it.
I've been enjoying your stuff lately, so I don't think it will be any different.
Yay. Of all the streets that border Central Park.
Wait, is this my engagement question?
Yes,
okay.
This is your engagement question.
Mm-hmm.
All the streets that border Central Park. So we're talking about Fifth Avenue. We're talking about Central Park West. Which is your favorite and why?
Interesting. Fifth Avenue, hands down.
Okay.
I could make a case for Park Avenue South because it's where the Plaza and Bergdorf and the Paris Theater and all of that is.
This is true.
And it's a much shorter stretch. So it's, very identifiable as, a limited space. I like this. But Fifth Avenue, my entire life has been lived no more than 2 blocks from Fifth Avenue. Mm-hmm. So my memories from grammar school, being a tiny kid and going into Central Park and having to walk from 62nd Street up to 65th and then going, it's home.
It's true.
Fifth Avenue is home.
You've got the zoo. You've got the ancient playground. There's so many. You've got the Met.
You've got the entrance to the reservoir.
Yeah.
You've got...
Yes, that is.
You've got the North Meadow and on and on and on.
I
So
love
Fifth Avenue.
Love Central Park, but that's for another day.
Okay.
Today, my sources are the New York Times, New York Magazine, and Spy Magazine.
Ooh, fun.
I know you love a good Spy magazine.
I do. I'm ready for the snark.
In July 1981, 100 Central Park South, a 15-story building overlooking the park, was sold to a developer who had also purchased the building next door, which was the Barbizon Plaza Hotel. The Barbizon Plaza was built in 1931 as the co-ed counterpart to the Barbizon Hotel on East 63rd Street.
Huh.
Interesting, right?
Very.
And we've discussed the Barbizon Hotel. It was a residential hotel for women that was dramatized in the sitcom Bosom Buddies, starring Tom Hanks. And we discussed it at length on our very first episode of this podcast.
Callback.
Yes. Okay. In its heyday, the 38-story Art Deco Barbizon Plaza had, listen to this, artist studios, 2 concert auditoriums, performance halls, and exhibition salons, and was considered the first fully equipped music and arts residential center in the country.
Really?
What is this beautiful, amazing place that was affordable for artists to live in?
Well, gone now.
I'll say. In the 50s, the Barbizon Plaza openly hosted conferences organized by the prominent homophile organizations Mattachine Society, Daughters of Bilitis,
Spell it.
Bilitis.
Bilitis.
Okay.
I think.
And the East Coast Homophile Organization. You clearly have heard the word homophile before. It was new to me.
Weirdly, I hadn't, but I was quickly able to put 2 and 2 together. However, when you said Mattachine, which is the only way I've ever heard it pronounced,
Okay.
I've actually heard it spoken of.
Sounds right to me.
So this is now going to be one of our family-centric anecdotes. I can't remember what made my dad bring it up the first time that he ever did bring it up, but he was very proudly announcing that he was pro-gay rights because in the 50s, he had a gay colleague who invited him to a meeting of the Mattachine Society, and he went.
Lovely.
Indeed. So that's one of his, like, I'm a card-carrying member of Gays Okay.
Hey, awesome. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
So these groups predated Stonewall and supported the rights of gay men and women, and they also provided community and resources. Now, in 1981, the plan was to tear down both 100 Central Park South and the Barbizon Plaza Hotel and make a, quote, mega luxury tower. That is 1985 lingo for you.
Mm.
The historical significance of the Barbizon Plaza was not a deterrent to this developer. He didn't give a shit, but he had no choice.
Was it
but
Fred
to give,
Trump?
Do you want to hear my story?
I'm sorry. You know, I love your stories so much that I get too excited and then I'm like, it's a guessing game. It's exciting.
Okay, so this asshole developer, he had no choice but to give a shit, though, about rent control and rent stabilization laws. 100 Central Park South was fully occupied with very invested tenants. A little history. Rent-controlled apartments were built before 1947, and rent-stabilized apartments were built after 1947 and before 1974. Both stabilized and controlled apartments allow for only a moderate increase in rent, so tenants living in these places end up paying way below market rate. When a rent-controlled apartment is vacated, it reverts to rent-stabilized. Did you know that? Which is why there are very few rent-controlled apartments left in the city. In the 1950s, 2 million of the city's apartments were rent controlled. Now there are only 16,000.
Wow.
It's a fine point, but pretty interesting. Rent control is about the tenant. That individual must have been living in that apartment since 1971, and they are considered permanent tenants.
You mean rent stabilized
No,
or rent controlled?
control.
Okay.
Is about the person. And these people are literally dying off.
Right.
Rent stabilization is about the apartment itself.
Mm.
So that's why those apartments can be kept in the family when the original tenant passes away. On the bright side, 50% of New York City rental apartments are rent stabilized, which is pretty cool.
Well, are you ready for some info?
Wait, one more thing.
Sorry.
New developers are given tax abatements for building rent stabilized apartments.
Which is what this is. That's what I was going to tell you.
No way. I didn't know that.
Yes, we are sitting in a rent stabilized. And
I love that.
I don't know if this is part of it, and it's worth, I guess, at some point looking into, but I do know that the developers of this building that we're in right now, that it's a green building. It's an eco-friendly, like certified something.
Love it.
And I think that gives them another tax abatement that is part of the rent stabilized status.
Fabulous.
Mm.
And these new ones, these new apartments, they're not dirt cheap, but they are infinitely more affordable than market rate.
Yes.
But back to 1981. If you are a developer and you buy a building with rent-controlled or rent-stabilized apartments, you can't just kick out the tenants if you want to knock it down. That's against the law. You might be able to trump up some bogus reason to evict a rent-stabilized tenant, but no way that's going to work with controlled tenants, because remember, that's about the tenant, the person. So our poor owner and begrudging landlord of 100 Central Park South was in a pickle. The easiest thing to do would be to offer the tenants money to move, make it worth their while. The tenants at 100 Central Park South were an eclectic group. Arnold Scassi was
Really?
Yes.
Oh my God.
And you know who he is. He was a fashion designer who had combined 2 3-room apartments to create a duplex with a park view. He paid $985 a month.
No, he did not.
Yep. Architect Angelo DeSpiro combined 3 apartments on the 7th floor and paid $1,600 a month. But then there were 1- and 2-room apartments that faced the courtyard with tiny windowless kitchens, and those rented for $233 to $406 a month. And then there were some 3-room apartments that faced the park that rented for $436 to $700 a month, less than half what the going rate would be. Some tenants of 100 Central Park South were well-to-do artists, while some were like Carla Binder, a widow who had lived in the building for 50 years, and Elsa Bodenheim, who was 99 years old and no longer mobile.
99. So born in 1882.
Good Lord.
Can you imagine?
Thank God she had a park view.
God bless her.
She earned it. The fact is, if the landlord had offered $50,000 to tenants to leave, most probably would have taken him up on it. Even if he had offered twice that and had some holdouts who negotiated for even more, it's conceivable he could have emptied the building for $6 million. A bargain, considering he'd bought both buildings for a measly $65 million, $50 million of which was a loan from Chase Bank. But the landlord didn't do that because the landlord was Donald Trump, and Donald Trump is cheap as fuck.
He's so cheap, he doesn't pay his bills.
Instead, he hired Citadel Management to run the building. Citadel specialized in tenant resettlement. In other words, they waged war on tenants to get them to vacate their apartments.
So it was a Central Park South pogrom.
Goodness. Trump and Citadel used a bunch of tactics on the Central Park South residents. On New Year's Eve, 1981, several tenants received notices saying that if they didn't rebuild the walls they'd taken down to combine their apartments in 12 days, they would be evicted. The wall removal, by the way, had been approved by the previous owner, but too bad for you. There's a new owner. I'm going to make new rules and I'm going to evict you. Well, guess what? Totally not allowed to do that. Completely against the law. Also, he was planning on tearing down the building anyway. So,
get a life.
Yeah, whatever. Nice try. Trump cut off their hot water and heat that winter. He stopped making any repairs to the building. He encouraged rodent infestation. He removed lampshades from hallway lights and put in very low wattage bulbs. The common areas were never cleaned. Packages were no longer accepted. Even water leaks were left untended to encourage the growth of mold and mushrooms. Tenants' personal habits were tracked to gather dirt to pressure them. Then Trump had a fantastic idea. He put out an ad in the Times saying homeless people were welcome to move into the vacant apartments. When he was questioned about this, he said, quote, "Some people think I'm just doing a number on people in the building. That's not true. I just want to help with the homeless problem. It'll take 2 or 3 years to get everybody out, and in the meantime, I'll have more and more vacant apartments for the building." Fortunately, others saw this plan as cynical and cruel, and the Human Resources Administration rejected the offer. The International Rescue Committee asked if he would instead house Polish refugees who needed temporary housing in these vacant apartments. Trump ignored this request. The most vulnerable tenants' phones were ringing off the hook with threats that the building would be demolished whether they liked it or not, and they would be out on the street. Harassment, capital H. But these were New Yorkers, and they were not going to be intimidated. The tenants started meeting at the apartment of John Moore. He said he made very good cocktails, and that's probably why they chose to meet at his apartment. They raised money, and they hired a lawyer, David Rosenholk, who had worked for legal services representing indigent tenants in the Bronx housing court. David knew a slumlord when he met one and knew exactly how to deal with him. For the next decade, there were suits and countersuits and filings galore, and Trump was never able to tear those buildings down or evict the tenants. Ultimately, he even had to pay the tenants' legal fees.
Nice.
After a final settlement in 1988, 100 Central Park South was converted into condos with 51 rent-regulated tenants still in residence. And in 2016, some rent-controlled tenants were still paying less than $1,000 for a one-bedroom apartment across from Central Park.
I'd like to title this segment, "Fuck That Guy."
Fuck that guy. But
what I find interesting is, why didn't he sell the building? Like, what was in it for him to hang on to it?
Well, he had this. Why didn't he sell it? That's a really interesting question.
Because if he converted it to condos, right, maybe no one wanted it.
Maybe no one bought it. He really did get it for that was
very cheap.
No money. Nobody really wanted it because it was a pain in the ass. I mean, you were inheriting all these people. And he did have this dream that he was going to have this mega luxury place, but too bad for you.
So he just moved over to the plaza.
Yes, exactly. Interesting.
Can we only refer to him as the felon?
Sure. Isn't that a nice story, though? It has a nice ending.
I love it.
Because all the little guy was just like, no, I will not let you ruin my life.
Well, I also think that what I love about the story is it is a quintessentially New York story. It's the embodiment. Remember that anecdote I told about my friend's mom who was wearing the fur coat on
Yeah.
East End Avenue. And the woman was like, I thought you knew better. And she's like, you thought wrong.
Right.
This entire story is about how New Yorkers will always say, you thought wrong.
Yeah.
And so it was like, you thought you were going to intimidate me. You thought you were going to use the court system, which at that point was already very pro-tenant. That it's like, what are you smoking? Like, what?
Hubris.
Hubris, which has never served him well in the long run.
And now Eric Trump owns one of the apartments in that building, which is interesting, I guess. Is it? I don't know.
Well,
Little tidbit.
it's sort of like,
If you can't beat him, join him. I don't know.
no, I mean, it's like daddy parked me in an apartment, you know? It's like those kids are all, I mean, Ivanka is her own variety of unappealing, but the two sons, they're both so
disgusting,
inept and dumb, and just they're like those idiot kids who are not even the bully. They stand behind the bully on the schoolyard and go, yeah, what he said. Yeah.
Ugh, so gross. You want to hear something else very strange about this story?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the sources was an article that was written in New York Magazine by Tony Schwartz. Why does that sound familiar? He was the ghostwriter for The Art of the Deal.
Shut it.
And Trump read this article. Wait, was it in New York Magazine? No, I think it was in the Times. I think it was the Times.
It was after he did The Art of the Deal.
No,
it was
this
before.
Is before.
Oh, and Trump wanted
read
him?
The article that was very damning and really made him seem like a horrible. It was New York Magazine, definitely New York Magazine, and it made him seem like an absolutely horrible, like just super dick of a guy. And Trump loved it. He loved the article. And he called up Tony and he was like, thanks for that article. That was great. Wonderful press. Thanks. And Tony was like, what? He was talking to him on the phone and Trump was like, yeah, I'm thinking of writing my memoir. And Tony's like, oh, wow, you're kind of young for a memoir. You know what would be a better idea? Something like, The Art of the Deal, like your expertise on something. And Trump was like, yeah, you want to write it? And Tony was like, okay. I mean, he was a up and coming writer and it was going to be ghostwritten and he was going to make a lot of money and he did. Isn't that crazy?
Well, knowing what we know now about Trump's pathology, it makes perfect sense, right? It's like you thought enough about me to want to spend all that time researching me, and you got the facts straight about me, and you wanted to spend all that time thinking about me.
Also,
you find me fascinating.
You're right. And also what everybody else read is like, this is a horrible human being who is bullying people. He was like, yeah.
He did,
and proud of it.
I don't think that, well, yes, but I think that, again, knowing what we know about him, he probably didn't even think about that part. That's irrelevant.
It's possible he didn't even read it, to be honest.
See,
we know
now,
he doesn't read.
Now we're getting to the heart of things. Anyway, yet another scummy story about king scum.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure. Go Kamala.
Your engagement question is, now this is particularly because you are a New Yorker.
Okay.
Have you ever shopped at Sears?
Not in New York, but
you have shopped.
Yeah, in Atlanta.
Okay. J.C. Penney?
Same thing. They're part of malls.
Okay.
They're like a wing of a mall, usually, right? One of those big, big stores.
Yes. So I'm going to read something to you.
Okay.
And what we're focusing on, again, the last episode that we did was the start of Fashion Week, and now we're closing it out.
Okay.
Okay. So here we go. From September 6th, 1983, New York Times. the title from the style section, Models, Their Faces Earn New Fortunes. In an article written by John Duca, I quote, "When Christie Brinkley stepped up to the podium in the Helmsley Palace's Versailles room last week for the announcement that she and Russ Toggs, a sportswear company, had agreed to produce the very first line of Christie Brinkley clothes, she did not quite resemble the fashion model who achieved immediate celebrity a few years back by appearing in a swimsuit on the cover of Sports Illustrated. Her blonde mane was combed and controlled. She wore a pristine linen jacket. She did not pout or blush. But when Harvey Rosenzweig, president of the Russ division, introduced her as the woman of the 80s, Miss Brinkley aimed her famous smile at the photographers with enough voltage to crack a lens and subtly undulated her hips in a gesture worthy of any Hollywood starlet. At last, she said, breathing into the microphone, I'll have something to wear. So let's just for a second talk about that was the most misogynistic, horrible, like she didn't pout, but she did swing her booty at you.
Right. And
all the while
posing as a businesswoman.
I won't read the rest of the article to you, but the entire article is not about her posing. It's about saying she cracked the code.
Yeah.
And it is very clear that she's 28 years old at the time. Lauren Hutton, before her, had gotten some of the first endorsement deals from Revlon. But Christie Brinkley was the first model to get a merchandising deal. Another model of slightly later vintage who followed in Christie Brinkley's shoes was Kathy Ireland.
That's what I was just thinking.
And Kathy Ireland,
calendars.
She did calendars, but she was a Sports Illustrated model as well. And she did everything from clothing to home furnishings.
Okay.
So, when I think about,
didn't she?
She really was like, I'm cashing
Salad
in.
Tongs by Kathy Ireland.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, stuff like that.
You name it. Her name was on it. And what was really interesting to me is that this whole story, and I'll give you a few other little bits, is about how, look, models are brands. And now they're going to use their faces to start selling things. Isn't that novel?
It's so crazy.
And, in the 90s, like the models that we think of as the supermodels, Linda Evangelista, Naomi Campbell, Cindy Crawford, Christy Turlington.
My favorite.
They all I think that Cindy Crawford is the only one who did like a full similar kind of deal. The others never did.
Weren't interested in that.
And how dumb was that? Because
if it's not your thing, it's not your thing.
Well, Christie Brinkley decided that she was going to have final say on every single design that they put out, that Russ Toggs put out.
Russ Toggs. So what
Sportswear.
Okay. It's t-shirts.
It's casual wear. I mean, it's the 80s. Linen culottes and a matching jacket.
And what did it look like?
Athleisure was not a thing yet, right? So it was women's sportswear. Did
she look like cute, or did she look like a woman? Was she a grown-up, or was she hip? Like, what was the general
She
look?
was youthful grown-up.
Okay.
Halston had recently done his secondary line with JCPenney, I believe. And that was when his super luxury and use of ultra suede and all of that, I think it was like Halston 2, then Halston 3 out into the masses. And if you ever want to see anything about Halston and have a great time, Ewan McGregor chewing the scenery as Halston.
That was such a fun documentary.
Oh my God. Biopic.
Right.
So
right.
good.
So sorry. Yeah, biopic.
So good. But the people who had done it prior to her were in the fashion industry. And what I thought was so amazing. So and I'll give you a little bit more about Christie Brinkley and Actually, I'll tell you now. So one of the things that she said, and why I brought up the supermodels who were more famous, they were more ubiquitous. What she said, Christie Brinkley said, was, having my face on the cover of a magazine, it's great. Being inside the magazine, it's great. Being on Sports Illustrated, it's great. None of that makes any money. That is my publicity. And what's going to make me money, and it had started already, was she was in National Lampoon's Vacation.
Right.
She recognized that she wanted giant paydays. And she did it because she knew that she was a brand. So now bringing this back to where we are today, hi, influencers.
Yeah.
This is the prototype for I'm a thing. You're going to get enticed by me, whatever I represent, and now bring your labels and I will incorporate them into the magic that is me.
And it is true. If you like that person, you probably want to wear the shirt that they're wearing.
Absolutely. This is a quote from Mr. Rosenzweig of Russ Talks, talking about, you asked, what was the clothing and what's
what
the
did it
thing?
look like?
He said, Christie represents a lifestyle that is real. She is young, active, athletic. We feel people relate to that. They don't hold their breath for the next designer collection anymore. They're into food, real things, not the kind of meaning they eat, not the kind of glamorous fashions or Southampton parties that women's wear daily projects. Most people consider that lifestyle unreal. If you're looking to sell to Mr. and Mrs. America, you have to think the way they do. So he was like, and again, this is 1983. Think about this. This is the very first push in New York City, in fashion land, of saying, you know what? Fuck you.
Right.
Fuck you, haute couture. This is not the future. The future is every single person in this country and democratizing fashion.
And that there's a middle ground between serviceable clothes and unattainable design. That you can have something that's actually well designed that you can afford to buy.
Exactly. And as I mentioned about Halston, this is the time when designers were recognizing that and they were creating their offshoots. So Ralph Lauren, all the stuff that like everyone bought and still buys is not his luxury line.
Right.
You can't afford it. I took my godson. He wanted a Ralph Lauren jacket as his graduation gift. So I took him, this is hilarious. I took him to the men's Ralph Lauren flagship mansion on 72nd Street.
Know it well.
And I got him the jacket that he wanted. It's sportswear, so it was affordable. But it was hilarious because we were walking through the store and he had never experienced customer service like that before. Do you want water? Do you want to sit down here? It's so luxurious, blah, blah, blah. And as we were sort of tooling around, he started looking at the sweaters, just a sweater. And he said, I don't understand. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he's like, well, the jacket is like $300, but this sweater goes under the jacket and it's $1,700.
No,
and I was like, that is not
Ralph.
Okay.
What?
And I was dying because I couldn't, it took like a good 10 minutes to explain that the order in which you put the clothing on does not dictate the price. He's like, but the sweater's covered. And I was like,
what did the sweater look like? I want to know. Nothing, like whatever.
It was just a crew neck pullover. It might have been a cable knit, but it wasn't particularly thick and chunky. It was a really nice cashmere sweater, but $1,700?
That's ridiculous.
It's embarrassing. Anyway, this is all about fashion for the people. In an unrelated article on the same page in the style section, there is a journalist who is sort of like the gossip columnist for fashion. And she writes, One of the important developments in the fashion industry in the last 6 months, 6 months, so this is beginning of 1983, has been the increasing number of designers who are very much involved in creating secondary lines as lower price supplements to their regular output. While some, like Jeffrey Bean, have been doing it for years, a growing number have joined in because no matter what they say, most have probably earned as much as they can from high-priced clothes. The only way to increase profits at this point, then, is to expand their market base. Still, it comes as some surprise that Perry Ellis and Yves Saint Laurent have decided to join this group. Now, perhaps women won't have to wait for markdowns to buy YSL.
Which is so interesting because it is somewhat counterintuitive. Like if you could get the label and you assume the quality for less, why is anybody ever going to pay, the $1,700?
But that's what's happening
I
now.
know.
And it's
actually, I bet more $1,700 sweaters are sold because of the $300 blazer.
Well, what's happened I believe, in the last 5 years because of Instagram and other social media is the frenzy of aspirational buying has gone off the charts. And so you have young people who they should not be buying,
No,
the most expensive handbag they can possibly find at Gucci. But it's become so beyond status from where I'm sitting. It's becoming a confirmation of identity to be able to participate in this overspending. So anyone who grows up in New York
the
City,
Birkin bags, what the
give me a fucking break. You want to spend $23,000 minimum on a bag? Oh, and by the way, you can't just buy a Birkin bag. You have to have Hermes choose you to buy a Birkin bag.
I did not know that. Why?
And there are Chanel products as well, where you have to get them to see you as a high enough profile client to have, because basically what's happening is that you are now who they are choosing to be the billboards for their store because you are visible.
So I'm a tacky billionaire and they won't let me buy their bag.
A tacky billionaire who comes in and says, I'm going to buy 16 of these at one shot, you are now, I would imagine, automatically a billboard that they're interested in. But I don't know. I mean, to be researched for another day. But when I read that you have to court the brand so that you're allowed.
I don't like them. That makes me angry.
Well, it should.
Because I know that they would reject me. And that hurts my feelings.
They're just tote bags, for God's sakes. I mean, Jane Birkin had it made for her because she was like, I'm at the beach and I need a really big bag that can carry my shit in Cannes from Le Croisette to a restaurant. And they were like, oh, let's whip up a tote bag with a flap for you. It's so dumb. It's so dumb. But what I was going to say is that any good New Yorker knows never buy retail. Give me a break. There are enough sample sales happening every day of the week that if you buy retail, you're a tourist and a chump. So there's a guy on Instagram who I love. I think his account is called Shabazz Says. He's British. And I think he's like a math teacher, a physics teacher. He's quite young. And he makes fun of all of these influencers who are showing you how to make 19 different kinds of very special ice. With here's lemon, here's a shape, here's this. And he'll just he sits on his bed, wrapped up in one of those blankets that looks like a tortilla. And he's like, you can't afford to have ice like this because you're a pavo. You can't afford this. Oh, I so want to have. He's so funny,
Oh my
and
God,
he has a book out now. It's not called "You Can't Have This Because You're a Pavo," but it's similar, and
what
he
does
is great.
pavo mean?
You're in poverty. It's British slang for you're in poverty. You're poor. You're a pavo.
poor.
You're
What
poor.
is it?
Anna Delvey. Why are you wearing that? Are you poor? That's my favorite. Along with, are you fat? Are you pregnant or are you fat?
I love her.
So anyway, this article is summed up with success in this business is not haphazard, said Miss Teagues, Cheryl Teagues to
Yes.
you, who had also done endorsements prior to this Christie Brinkley deal. It's not luck. It comes down to thinking carefully about every job that comes your way and weeding out those that are not on a high level. I planned everything out and said no to more things than I've said yes. It's a business, a beautiful business, but a business all the same that you can manipulate and mold and shape. Models were in the position of being used for so long, and now they're learning to use the business to a certain extent. Just because you're beautiful, why shouldn't you have brains? Quote, when the Sears proposal came along, I knew it was right, even though my friends wondered what I was doing, she said. Now we've proven our point and people are envious. At the same time, I think Sears probably thought they'd only hear from me on the telephone. For the past 3 years, they've seen or heard from me every day. I don't think they knew what they were getting into.
I love it.
And my last, so I jotted down a few notes about why this really hit me. And here's some things to think about the 80s. 1983, you're just coming out of the 70s, right? Like we already have talked about this on this podcast. 1980, 1981, 1982, you're still in the 70s. Like
Right.
things don't change that quickly. 83 is the beginning of welcome to the 80s. And so this article to me exemplified so much. The first thing being that even though this was an article sort of celebrating that this really young woman was making a huge business deal and taking responsibility for herself, it was incredibly condescending.
Yeah.
The opening. So here's what I liked. This article, whether the guy liked it or not, was really about women coming into power, career, money, and control. It's also about comfort in clothing. All of this stuff is about youth, athleticism. You can move. You are not trapped in the clothes. And think about who were the clothes horses prior to this. Society ladies who went to Capote's black and white ball. The swans. So they were encased in whatever it was that they were told to wear by the designers who shaped them. Right? Skazi was one of them, by the way. It's also about making things accessible, about democratization of fashion and beauty. It's taking a woman from being an object to being a business owner and a brand manager. That's pretty big. This is the first wave of women coming to the forefront and doing it as women always have to from the side.
Right.
She's coming in. This is not someone who's scratching her way to the top of haute couture. This is a woman who's like, I want the money. And the money is JCPenney and Sears, where everybody in America shops. So back to the engagement question, when you're not in New York, that's where you shopped.
Yeah, no, it's true.
So anyway, I love this. I love this about Christie Brinkley, our uptown girl, Billy Joel's uptown girl.
She came into the card shop that we both worked at.
Did she now?
She sure did. And I sold her a card or two. I can't remember. And she gave me her credit card and it was American Express and it said Christie Brinkley. And I was like, what? Oh, hi.
You didn't recognize her?
Not immediately.
Because, as the guy who wrote this article said, she wasn't with her mane of hair and pouting and blushing. She was just a normal person buying a card.
Oh, weird.
Fuck that guy.
She's like pouting and blushing on the cover of Sports Illustrated.
No, she was like, just like, sun's out, tits out. Yeah. Let's go. So I think I have an idea to wrap up this
good.
podcast.
Okay. Hold on. What's our tie-in?
Well, this is a little bit different than our usual tie-ins, because our tie-ins, we always try to find like what thematically is happening in the story.
Sure.
This is more a commentary on both stories.
Okay.
Our tie-in, fuck that guy.
I love it.
So to Trump and the writer of that article, boo on you.
Boo.